Have you ever had a boss who treated you like garbage, treated you as if you were a piece of scum or maybe a piece of gum on the street that they didn't even want to step on, gave you no respect whatsoever? Well, now in my mature years, in my final quarter of life, I can say that I've had such a boss, and that person lived in Southwest Florida, I would say. And I'm going to give a fictional name to that person right here, and I'm going to call her Cruella Snot. Okay, Cruella Snot. That might sound a little harsh on my part. After all these years, I carry no bitterness, but I'm just telling you about Cruella Snot. Maybe Cruella Snotface would be a better description for her. I have no animosity toward her now, nothing to hate. She's long been buried under the ground. She perished in about, from all my research, in around 2006. She went way down into the ground. And all of us, as like I say in many of my videos, all of us are blessed souls. All of us are, you know, we have a special place in this universe. And I'm not going to say that this woman has a special place in hell. I'm not that vindictive, but to me, she treated me like a piece of garbage. I don't know about you. Have you had bosses that treated you like you're a scum, that you're like the scum of the earth? They treated you with no respect whatsoever in instances where you deserved all the respect in the world, or when the person who was your boss just acted holier than thou and they did nothing to help you improve in your job performance. If your job performance sucked, if your job performance wasn't all that great, or maybe you've had incidences where you've done a great job, an interesting job, and you fulfilled all expectations of what your job function was, and still you had that boss who just treated you like scum. Now, Cruella was just that kind of person to me. I was in my 20s, and it was in the 1970s. And I'm just telling this story about this woman as an example to you so you can think about your particular situation in life right now. If you're a senior, maybe you've had such a boss in the past, or if you're a much younger person, perhaps middle aged or a young adult, maybe you're going through such hell right now. So I'm going to tell you about the hell I went through with this Cruella lady. Um, right off the bat, my first day on the job, I was a rookie newspaper reporter, and I just graduated from a university in the western United States, landed the job back there somehow or another in Southwest Florida. And from my first day on the job, the moment I first saw this woman, she was from New York, and she had that New York accent, and I can't make a New York accent. I don't know how to do it, but all I know is that if she had an accent of any kind, it was it was as if she was a mentor of the devil himself. That's the way I look at it after all these years. She just try to picture this woman, what she looked like in her mind. She, at the time that I first met her, like I say, I was in my 20s, and she thought that she had a body. She acted like she was, when she'd walk into the room, she would strut in the high heels, and she wore what was popular at that time in the 70s. She wore mini skirts. Mini skirts, that's what they called them. And the mini skirts that she wore were dangerously high. And she thought of herself, from my perception, as this pardon my expression, like she thought of herself as some kind of a sex queen, like everybody should be adoring her. But I figured out real soon, despite my youth at that time in my 20s in the 1970s, that a part of her was, I believe, afraid of me. I was a threat to her. but I wasn't strong enough and vibrant enough at that time to really face up to her, to step up to her, to talk to her in her face. What's your situation? If you've had a dirty, stinking Cruella kind of a boss, have you ever uh, talked directly to that person and told them essentially that they are full of it, and talked to them face to face and told them, they don't have a right to treat anybody that way? I would imagine that a lot of young adults these days would not put up with that kind of nonsense. But I put up with it because, for a wide variety of reasons, I was taught as I was growing up to give all people respect, particularly your elders, people are above you, older, supposedly wiser. But this woman was not wiser. She was not better than me in any regard. And I would call, let's just say the newspaper I worked for down there, let's call it the Amazing Gazette. I'll just say it was the Amazing Gazette. I'm making that up. That's not the name of the actual newspaper that I worked for down there. I do not want to embarrass anybody. I understand that newspaper is still going, it's still a viable situation. And at that time, I was a police reporter. Yeah, that's where a lot of starting journalists, they begin as police reporters. And I believe that the circulation of the newspaper that I worked for down there, it was fairly considerable it was kind of a moderate sized newspaper. And, I'm talking maybe 50 to 70,000 circulation per day, something like that. I don't have the exact figures in front of me. But this woman, this Cruella, I don't know if there have been stories in literature throughout the years about people like this. They're always like the antagonists in stories. They're the people that cause problems for the so-called protagonists, the good people. And I would call myself a good person at that time. Although I was in my 20s, there were days, there were weeks where I was physically strong and I looked super healthy. You got to picture me at that time. And there were periods where my face, even though I was in my 20s, my face would grow out into, there were pimples all over, and I had a lot of oily skin. And if I bathed every day, as which I did, my skin turned really oily, and I probably looked pretty scummy, even though I wasn't scummy, even though I was uh, had good hygiene at that time. Be that as it may, I dressed impeccably. I was a young married man at that time, and I did my utmost. And in my mind, I did a damn good job for the newspaper that I worked for. And I did a particularly good job, even though I worked for this Cruella woman. And as soon as I believe it was within the first 2 or 3 days, almost her exact words to me were, "How did you get this job? What qualifies you to be here?" Well, of course, I didn't really defend myself. And she says, "What do universities teach their journalism students these days? You don't know anything," she said to me. You shouldn't even be here. You should be doing something else." And, she wanted to offend me. She wanted to test me. And like I had said, she was jealous as heck of me. And not just jealous, she was fearful of what I could become. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I won't get into those specific reasons why she would have been jealous of what I could become. But be that as it may, just for the fact purposes, there were reasons for her apparent jealousy, and it continued, and it continued. She was relentless. And I was just as relentless as she was to do a great job, but I was not for any second, not for a moment, trying to impress that woman. And I'm not saying that bitch or that blankety blank, because that was not my style, and it's still not my style of speaking these days. I still speak respectfully of other human beings, even those who do not necessarily respect me. So everything kind of came close to blows, to an explosive point between me and this Cruella lady. And I must say that her hair, let me describe her hair. She had this blonde hair that just kind of poked out up way over into the universe and around and flowing down her shoulders. And she was a fakey version of Barbie. She was a bad Barbie. When I say Barbie, I'm talking about the Barbie doll that's been so famous and respected in movies in recent years. She wasn't a good Barbie. She was a bad Barbie. She was a slimy Barbie. Slimy Barbie. And so when I came in that day, I was doing my rounds. I went around to the police departments and got all the latest dope, and called around to area district attorneys' offices and did, what you're supposed to do when you have that kind of a job. And the police beat is usually the basic primary beat where a lot of reporters start, as I previously indicated, because it's basic meat and potatoes stuff, the murder, car wreck, those kind of things. So anyway, and then she summons me to her desk. She goes like this: Duke, come here. And she would summon me as if I was a dog named Duke. That's what she would do. And you know what I would do? I came over to her desk and she said, the medical examiner wants to see you. And I said, the medical examiner? Why does the medical examiner want to see me? What's this about? I'm happy to go see him, but just let me know why he wants to see me. She said, I don't know. Just get over there right now. Do what I tell you. Okay. I didn't say okay. I'll go right there. No problem. So I'd never been to the medical examiner's office. In the West Coast where I came from, the term medical examiner, we usually called them coroner. So I was, a little familiar because I'd lived down there with the medical examiner term. So I went down to the medical examiner's office. I determined where that was because, like I say, I'd never been there before. Went to the medical examiner's office, which happened to be in a regional medical center inside of a hospital. Well, this to me was new because in the communities I'd hailed from in the western United States, such facilities, the coroner's medical examiner offices were standalone buildings, not inside a hospital. So anyway, I went into this hospital and asked the front desk where the medical examiner's office was, and there they pointed in a certain direction, and I went to where I was told, and I just couldn't find the place, right away. I had to ask another person, and they said, pointed down a hallway, that's second door on your left. Second door on your left. So I went down to the second door on the left, and I knocked on the door. Okay, there was no answer. And the door, I tried to turn the knob so I could walk in, and no answer. So, okay. I was told to go down to the medical examiner's office, and I don't want to go back to Cruella, the wonderful, glorious Cruella, the most amazing boss that anybody would ever have. She was specifically a copy editor. That's for a boss. But anyway, I stood there for maybe, I guess it was another 5 minutes, and I knocked on the door again because there was no answer. But I didn't want to be too loud because if I rapped on the door, that would be discourteous, I believe. And There was some nurse walking by, as I recall, and a nurse, I said, well, is this the medical examiner's office? That's what it says right here. The person briefly said, yes, of course it is. That's the door right there. So I knocked harder on the door. Still no answer. And you got to remember, this was the days before cell phones, so I couldn't just pick up the phone and say, hey, this is Duke Maxwell from the newspaper. Can I come in? No, no such thing in those days. So waited another 3 minutes, and then I really rapped on the door. Bang, bang, bang. And so finally, the door opened, and that's fine. And there was a person that opened the door. It was nice, attractive, I would say smaller woman of Asian descent. She looked very great. She was very polite, of Asian descent. And I said who I was, and I gave the name of the medical examiner. All these many years later, I don't remember the name of the medical examiner, but she knew. And I said, is he here? And I understand that he wants to see me. And the person who was wearing what appeared to be a nurse's uniform, that the woman that had greeted me at the door, she said, no, he's not here. I don't think he's expecting anybody. And I go, well, may I come in? And the woman said, yes, sure, come right on in. And so there was nothing really in the room, the entryway that I first went into the medical examiner's office. There was just a table with really nothing on it, and there were a few chairs lining against the wall. And okay. So she said, you just wait right here. I don't know if he's going to be back today, because by that point it was maybe 3:30 in the afternoon. So the so-called regular working hours, she didn't say this, were coming to an end. So she said, just wait right here. Okay. So I sat down, and the person who greeted me, she left. She didn't go into any other room within the medical examiner's office. She just went out on the hallway. And so all of a sudden, I'm in this waiting room in the medical examiner's office. I don't know what to expect. I'm kind of in the dark as to what's going on, because supposedly I'd been summoned here by the medical examiner who wanted to see me for some reason that I didn't know. And the Cruella, helpful as always, as I previously indicated, she refused to tell me specifically why the medical examiner wanted to see me. So there I am waiting, and I wait another 10 minutes, and then it's 15 minutes, and then I think it was close to 20 minutes. I was in this little room with just a few chairs and one table and nothing else, and a clock on the wall. And I looked at the clock on the wall, and it matched whatever my watch said, and time was ticking by, and I had a job to do because I was employed, and of course, and I didn't want to miss out on my daily responsibilities. So it was after about 20 minutes, the entry door from the hallway opens up again, and here is the little woman who greeted me earlier, this smaller. I'm about 6 foot at that time, and this woman was maybe 5'2", and she walked me to another door that led from inside the waiting room, and she opened the door to that room, and she said, why don't you just wait on in here? I think that the medical examiner should be here within 2 or 3 minutes, and so you can just wait right in here. I go, okay. So I went into that room, and the woman closed the door behind me, and I'm in a room, and I'm the only living person in that room, and there are 6 dead bodies in the room. And all of the dead bodies are laying on slabs, And all of the dead bodies had been autopsied from the upper chest down to the groin. There were incision marks, and each of the bodies had these big fish hook things. They were like big, giant fish hooks. I guess this is what they do. They don't need to totally sew the person back together because that individual is either going to be cremated or buried or something. And here I am, and I'm in this room with all these dead bodies, and I didn't expect this. And I thought, whoa, geez, here I am. And I, I looked at the bodies, and I imagined that the expression on my face was quite curious. At that point, I didn't become sickened looking at all these carcasses, bodies around, and but I was kind of stunned as to why I would be left in this kind of situation. What kind of professional medical examiner's office would stick a visitor in a room like this with absolutely no explanation? And when I'd look at the bodies, you could see the hearts, Hearts, the hearts of the individuals. Part of the hearts were visible. The lungs were visible through the incisions that were kind of sloppied back together by these big giant fish hook things. And so I'm looking at it, and I didn't realize that a human body, our bodies, a lot of us, if we're normal, we have this much a layer of fat all around our bodies, and I could see the layers of fat on each individual, and they're laid out naked all over. Like I said, there's 6 bodies, and 5 of the bodies were of men. They were men, and their average age, I would say, was between 27 and 35-ish. And all of these individuals looked to me as if they were either South American, like Venezuelan, kind of Colombian maybe, or maybe even Cuban. I wasn't sure. And then the younger person, the 6th person, like I said, there was 5 dead men, and then there was the 6th person, and that was a woman. And as I recall, the woman was blonde, and there she was, laid out naked, carved up like a fish. And I looked at her, and as I recall, my eyes were just wide open, bigger than silver dollars at that time. And I just looked at her. I looked at her like out of both respect and curiosity. And unlike the men that were dead, for some reason they left her eyes wide open. And her eyes were staring right up toward the ceiling. And her eyes were blue. There's a part of me that wanted to pray for all of these people, a part of me that wanted to wonder why I was put in this room, who put me in this situation. I remember that Cruella, of course, as I previously explained, told me to go down here. And so then I thought, there was a chair in the room, 1 or 2 chairs, and I sat down, and I tried not to stare at these dead bodies. I wanted to show them respect. But I would think that whoever operated the medical examiner's office would have shown them respect by, after the autopsies, putting sheets on their bodies or something, some kind of a cover, not just leaving them out there in the open like that. So I'm sitting there, I sit there, and I'm waiting for the medical examiner. Like I told you, I forgot his name because it's been so many years, but I knew what he looked like because I'd seen his photograph in the newspaper a number of times, and he was a taller, handsome, semi-handsome Caucasian guy with a grayish beard, and he looked okay, so I knew who to expect, but I kept waiting there, and I was in that room with the dead bodies for maybe, I think, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, and time kept clicking on, and I kept thinking, I got to do my job because I have a job to do at the place where I work. I can't just sit here on my big fat butt and not do any work. And so I was like, in my mind, I was kind of captured in a situation where I needed to get and do my job. So that Cruella, the witch, uh, okay, witch, and so that she could, I'd do the job that I'm supposed to do. So I thought, well, this is a waste of time. My time is being wasted. I got to get the heck out of here. I wasn't afraid of the dead bodies, but I just needed to get the heck out of there. So I went to the door in which I'd been led into this room where all the dead bodies were, and I tried to open the door, but the door was locked. Somebody had locked me into the room with all the dead bodies. What am I going to do? And so I sat there and I had no other option. Somebody had planned this kind of thing, and I sat down and I thought about, the first time I had seen a dead body, and it wasn't necessarily a good situation either. That dead body, there's a number of dead bodies, and they were in a plane crash in the western United States where I'd lived. And so, like I said, when I lived and worked in Florida, I was in my 20s. And so, I would say, I'm just need to tell this side story so you can put everything into perspective. So I worked in a place called, we'll call it Reno, Nevada, and the newspaper, I'll give a fake name for the newspaper because the people at that newspaper, I don't want to offend them either for what happened then. But I was kind of, I would say, working for this program where they would hire teenagers to work for an entire summer, and they paid the teenagers, one of which was me, $100 to work for the entire summer, and that way we could get experience. So as a teenager, I worked at this newspaper in Reno, Nevada. We'll call it the Crown Chronicle. That's just a made-up name. That's not the real name. And so I worked there, I think I only worked there 2 days a week at the Reno newspaper. Or in the mornings, it was like 4 hours, 2 mornings a week, and that was so I could get experience as a potential journalist when I eventually grew up, so I could learn the business and learn what to do, the who, what, when, where, why, how, and when, the whole deal. And I was probably doing a pretty good job at that, but the guy that worked there, I'll say that his name was Mr. Mr. Crude. Okay, we'll call him Mr. Crude. That's not his real name. So Mr. Crude, and he went through the markings of being a good guy, but he didn't like me either. And I believe it was because I was so young, and he was not paid to babysit youngsters, teenagers. He had a job to do. He was a professional. So he didn't like necessarily having me around. So I believe I was not his favorite, possibly because my late father, my father was alive at the time, but my father was a big executive of this whole newspaper company. And so here I am, sitting and working there, and I did a foolish, selfish thing. As a teenager, I'm not making an excuse. I showed up for work that day at the Reno newspaper, and I wasn't wearing a collared shirt. I wasn't wearing a tie. And I wasn't wearing a sports coat. And I wasn't dressed professionally. And I don't recall that they ever had a dress code for the youngsters that worked at the newspaper. They never stated it. It was just assumed that I should have known, and I should have known. But this was closer to midsummer or the end of summer, so I wore a casual t-shirt and jeans, and I believe maybe boots. And this was what I was used to at that time. And so this Mr. Crude called me into his office, and he read me the riot act, which was right for him to do. He read me the riot act, so to speak, because I was unprofessional. And he said, essentially, what do you have to say for yourself? Look, you're not professional. You're not showing up in a professional fashion. You've got a lot to learn. What do you have to say for yourself? Well, I believe my answer was something to the effect to this Mr. Crude, I have no excuse. I did a wrong thing, and it'll never happen again. And I believe his response was he was a stern guy. He always had these big giant cigars in his mouth, like huge cigars. I don't know if they're the kind of cigars that the President Teddy Roosevelt would use. Those kind of cigars, that kind of came to mind. And Mr. Crude was an avid baseball fan, so that's great. So I think the last thing that Mr. Crude wanted to deal with was some teenage boy. And as I recall, he would take his cigar and he smished his cigar out, and he lit up another cigar. And he looked at me again as he took a puff out of that big cigar, and he had like this big goatee. It's even bigger than the one that I have here. And he says, "You sure? You don't have anything to say for yourself?" Of course, I did not try to defend myself, because I knew that what I had done, dressed improperly, was wrong. So I said, I'm going to go home and change right now. I'm going to be right back. I'll be dressed professionally. And I was meaning that. And he goes, "No, you don't have to do that. You can just go for the day, but make sure this never happens again." And I go, "No, I'll be back. I'll be right back." And so I ran out and got to my bicycle. Now, I've got to say that the story that I'm telling you about right now, involving the Reno newspaper, involved death. It involved lots of deaths, and that involved me, those lots of deaths. So that's why I'm telling you this Reno newspaper story, because in a way, in my mind, as I'm stuck in this waiting room in the hospital of the medical examiner's office down in Florida, where this goofy woman had sent me, I was thinking about that, what happened to me back. So I went out way back in Reno. Like I said, I was a teenager, and I just pedaled as fast as I could and pedaled all the way home. And I got at home, and I just jumped off my bicycle. And I didn't have a car yet. I think I might have been a little too young to drive, or I hadn't got my license or whatever. So I ran into my home, and my mom says, "Well, what are you doing here, Duke?" And I go, "Well, I got to change. I got to get back to work." And she goes, "Why?" And I didn't explain to her. I just didn't have time to make any explanations. All I did was I put on a ruffled tuxedo shirt that was far too appropriate for work. It was more of a formal tuxedo shirt that was more appropriate for a wedding or a fancy ball or something. But I just put on that tuxedo shirt, and then I had my bell-bottom pants. That's right. Those bell-bottom pants were really good in those days. You know, that's what the style was. And I had a good body at that time, and I was not yet 6 foot. I was probably 5'9.5". I wasn't going to reach 6 foot until age 20, 21. But I was there for it. I wanted to show this boss, this Mr. Crude, that I was quite the guy, and that I was not trying to act more than I was. I was not trying to act like somebody special. So I got back on my bike, and I pedaled as fast as I could to get back to the newspaper. And then all of a sudden, an accident happened. And the accident was that my bell bottoms got caught in the spokes. My bell bottoms got caught in the spokes of my bicycle, and I got off my bike, and I was trapped, and I was stuck in my bicycle, and I didn't know that within the next hour I was going to come upon a bunch of dead bodies. I had no idea at that time. All I wanted to do was get back to the work, get back to the newspaper. So I somehow I untangled myself and I got and I had these high top shoes with I think I can't remember what they were, but they had these big giant heels on them, and they weren't even appropriate for riding a bicycle. But I got back and I rode back all the way to the newspaper, and I got to the newspaper and I went. As I recall, the newsroom was on the second floor, and so I jumped up because I could go 2 by 2 steps, and I just raced up to, and I went into the newsroom, which I had just left maybe a half hour before, and there was nobody in the newsroom, no adults. Everybody was gone, and it was like, what? What? There's nobody here. And then I get, well, oh, I made a mistake. I shouldn't have come back. Everybody's off at lunch. And so I think, well, maybe I'll just sit around and be here when Mr. Crude comes back to lunch so that Mr. Crude can see me and that he can realize that I'm a serious guy and I'm not a stuck-up little jerk. I'm a good little guy. And so I sat down there. And I misstated. I said there were nobody in the whole newsroom. There was a secretary there, the greeting person. It was a woman. And then all of a sudden, the police radio goes off. And police radio is something in those days, you played it all the time in the newsroom so you could hear was something going on. And the radio says, beep, 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 beep. There was like this beep thing, and it goes, plane crash up on the Mount Rose Highway, plane crash, blah, blah, blah. Code 3, code red, whatever they said. Get up there, quick. And so I go, oh my God, there's no reporters right here. I'm the only reporter in here, and I'm not really a reporter. I'm just a young adult. I'm a teenager. So I got, wow, okay. So I said, where's a photographer? One thing I knew is you always have to have a good photograph to go with a good story, especially if it's something like a plane crash. And there were no reporters around, no editors for me to ask. And so I asked the secretary lady, I go, help me. I mean, I need to have a photographer go with me. And I didn't tell her that I didn't have a car, so I couldn't get all the way up to the top of Mount Rose all by myself because I didn't have a car. And she said, well, everything's okay. And she went to another room across the hallway, and she got a photographer. I think his name, I'll just say his name was Jim. His name was Jim. So all of a sudden we're in Jim's car, and we're going, and at that time, Reno didn't have the big highways that Reno has right now. It was just like a little 2-lane highway, and I think the speed limit to south of Reno, you'd have to go about 12 miles south of Reno, and I think it was called U.S. Highway 395, and it was 2 lanes. And here's this photographer, and I'm in the front seat, and I had no idea what was going to happen. He kind of expected it, and then I've never liked to drive fast. I'm a guy, even I drive right now like an old grandpa. My wife says I drive like an old grandpa, even today. And when I was a youngster, if I was able to drive, I would have driven at that age like an old grandpa because I don't go fast. But this guy was going almost 100 miles per hour. Woo! And he know that's his craft. He's got to get to the scene. He's got to get me to the scene. And he might have wondered, well, he's stuck with this teenager, the photographer, but it is what it is. So there was nothing else to do. So all of a sudden, we were going on, and then all of a sudden we take a right, and we're going about 5 or 8 more miles, and all of a sudden we're on something called the Mount Rose Highway. And he's taking these curves and stuff, and I'm able to keep my breakfast in my tummy because even though he's going so fast, I think he was probably breaking every driving rule known to man at that time just to get to the scene. And I looked up through the window of the car, and I could see, holy cow, there's smoke up there. That must be the plane crash. There's nothing else that it could be but the plane crash. So before long, we went maybe 10 miles up the highway, and then all of a sudden we're at some place called Sky Tavern. And Sky Tavern was a little tiny place where youngsters went to ski. It wasn't one of the major resorts, but the driver, I think I said I'm going to call him Jim, screeched on the brakes, and all of a sudden we stop in the parking lot of Sky Tavern, and I could not see any police vehicles. There were no sirens to be seen. All I knew that I needed to get to this plane crash because I had a job to do. And my job was to get to that plane crash as soon as I could. So I started running as fast as I could. And as a teenager, there were no limitations in my mind. I was not athletic necessarily, but I was able to run, and I was able to run for life. I was running for life. And whose life was I running for? I was running for the lives of whoever was in that blessed plane that was apparently causing that smoke up at the top of the hill. So I ran way up toward the smoke. The only thing in my mind was to run toward the smoke. And the photographer, whose name I'm calling him Jim because I can't remember his name. He was following me. He couldn't keep up with me because I was going so gall darn fast. I've never run that fast in my life. And we were far from any pavement at that point, and all of a sudden we're running through wilderness. There's trees, maybe pine trees, ponderosa pines, many dozens of feet to the left and many dozens of feet to the right, and I just kept running and running. And what did I do at that point? I fell right into the creek. There was a creek there, and I fell face first, right into the creek. And so there was my tuxedo top that I had on, and my tuxedo top was all like ruined, and my pants, my bell-bottom pants that had already been ripped when my bike got tripped in the spokes. But somehow my shoes, those top-notch high-heeled shoes, they still worked, and I got up, and I kept running. I kept running. Unbeknownst to me, Jim, the photographer who was behind me, took a photo of me. And in that photo of me, I've got mud all over my face. I've got mud all over my clothes. I've got mud all over everything. I look like I had just, been shot during World War I in, the trenches, and that I'm one of those victim kind of guys. And I'm not dressed up like I promised my boss back at the newspaper that I would be looking like. But I didn't worry about those things at that time. I just got back up and I kept running up that hill as fast as I could. Now remember, when I'm in the medical examiner's office in Florida, stuck in with all those dead bodies, I'm remembering what had happened to me earlier, and I'm relating my memories of my experience with dead bodies. And that's why I'm bringing this up. So anyway, I was going up the hill, boop, 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 and then I followed the smoke. And all of a sudden, for some reason, there was no smoke anymore. And I don't know how long it was. There were no limitations to what I wanted to achieve. Even as a teenager, I wanted success. Even as a teenager, I wanted to do what was right. And all of a sudden, there I was, way up on the mountain, way up on the hill, and there was the fuselage of a private airplane. The wings had been shattered. A portion of the private airplane was ripped apart. And I saw a dead body and portions of other deceased individuals in the aircraft. And I sat on a large boulder nearby. I didn't make any attempt to touch the aircraft. I didn't even make any attempt to touch the bodies because it was apparent to me that the person was deceased because the eyes were wide open and the other individuals were obviously dead as well. And so I sat on that big boulder and I looked at the deceased person, and the thought that was going through my mind is that person woke up this morning not knowing that he was going to be dead right now, not knowing that his life was going to end this way. And suddenly, as I'm sitting there, here comes Jim, the photographer, and he's snapping some photos. And then, after another, I believe it was probably 3 to 5 minutes, a bald man showed up. And he was, I believe, wearing a suit, but it was as if he was wearing some kind of a uniform. And I recognized him from photos of him that had been in the newspaper earlier, on earlier events. And it was the coroner, the guy who, examines dead bodies. So there he was. And he had a kind expression on his face. And as he was approaching, the coroner, was approaching the scene, he looked up at me and he only had 3 words for me. He said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yes. Yes, I'm okay." So I got back to the newspaper. I don't remember, Jim took me there as fast as we could get there. And then when we got there, there was my boss who was away at lunch, the man who smoked the cigars. And I said, "I can write the story for you now." I said, "I was the only reporter there. There were no other reporters show up." And he goes, something like this. He says something to the effect, I don't remember his exact words. "Yeah, I guess you can." So this was the guy that didn't necessarily show much respect for me, but it was a totally different way than this Cruella lady in Florida behaved. So I wrote the story, and it didn't make it into the morning edition because the morning edition was operated by kind of a competing newspaper, even though they were sister newspapers. So the next morning, I showed up and worked with this cigar smoking guy, and we edited the story, and it made it into the newspaper. And the story that I wrote was a piece of shit. Think of my age, think of my maturity, but I did the best I could. It wasn't a great story. He did a great job of editing it to make it seem like it made some sense. But that was the way it was, and I think that my family, friends, and acquaintances were somewhat proud of me for what I had done. And so then, as those thoughts faded from me while I sat in the coroner's office, the medical examiner's office down in Florida, I had those memories because I had to think about something while I'm in there with all those dead bodies, and then all of a sudden, the door opens, the door to the room in which I was with all those dead bodies, and there was that person who let me in, the nurse of small stature, maybe 5'2"-ish, and she said something to the effect as, "Well, you can go now." And I said, "Well, what about the medical examiner? Is he showing up?" She says, "I haven't heard about that. I didn't know that he was going to show up for anything. He's not been here." And so, okay, this is time for me to go. It's not like I'm trying to run away from all these dead bodies. So I get out and I went back out in the hallway of the hospital, but I've never been a very good rat, so I've never really followed the labyrinth of hallway after hallway, and I kind of didn't find my way to the exit of the hospital, and I asked somebody, and they go that way, and then all of a sudden I came around a corner, and there I saw the medical examiner, and he was standing in the hallway, and he was walking toward where his office was, and so I said to him, "Hey," and I called him by his name, which I indicated I couldn't remember right now, and he goes, "Yes," and I said, "I'm Duke Maxwell. I work for the newspaper, and you wanted to see me?" And he said something like, "No, I had no such request. Why are you here?" And I don't know you or whatever. So I knew that I was stuck in some kind of an odd situation. Got back to the newspaper building, and then I walked past Cruella, the lady with the short cutoffs and the curly blonde hair. And I forgot to mention earlier, she wore this gaudy lipstick that was too much. It was all like this red stuff. Ugh. You couldn't have paid me $5 million to kiss her, and I'm serious about that. But anyway, she said, "How did it go?" I said, "Oh, fine." That's what I said. I said, "Oh, fine." I didn't tell her anything else. And she goes, but what did the coroner say? Did he say anything? The medical examiner, coroner, medical. I said, "No, he didn't say anything. Nothing to say." And I walked back over to my desk, and then after 10 or 15 minutes while I'm working at my desk, I overhear her, and there she's giggling and chuckling into her phone. She's laughing. Well, she's laughing obviously about the situation, and she said something like, he fell for it, didn't he? The guy fell for it. Duke fell for it." And I could hear her, but she thought she was covering her voice. But I had pretty good hearing at that time, and I could hear a gnat fart from a half of a mile away at that time. And so I knew what she was doing. I knew she was part of the scheme. And then I realized that it was April Fool's Day. It was the 1st of April. And so here's this woman that's talking about professionalism, and she's wasting my time and our company's time, our employer's time, and her time as well. And she's talking about being professional, and she's doing this, giving me no respect whatsoever. So I just took it for what it was. I didn't make it a big deal about it. I chose not to approach her. I did not want to give her that satisfaction. I refused to give her that satisfaction. So as my workday ended, I went home to my beautiful wife. And I don't think I even mentioned it to my wife because I didn't want to make it seem like I was this fool and I wasn't trying to pull over any dishonest things on my wife, but that's the way it was. And so I mentioned all these stories for you. I don't know what kind of situation you're in right now, what you've had to go through with your bosses, what kind of disrespect they've shown you. But this is just a lesson, I think, that we need to take our bosses who treat us like garbage, like what they are. They are trash. They don't deserve your respect. They don't deserve your time. Think about your personal position. Think about where you are right now and where you want to be in your life. And I don't think that should be with your bosses who show you no respect whatsoever.